The problem with a creator is that inevitably one must then ask the question, who created the creator? And that, of course, is endless. You can go on and on doing that. So somewhere you have to start with the first cause, and surely the first cause is the universe itself. Man is one way in which the universe experiences itself.
But your God is obviously very different then from Hugh Montefiore's God.
There's a point that Herman Bondi raised about, you know, the fact that many terrible things have been done in the name of religion, and I think it's perhaps important to point out that probably the reason for this is that people for a long time, I think particularly in the West, have had this concept, you know, I'm here and the truth is over there somewhere, and there is a narrow path that leads to that truth. If you have that concept, which I sort of think of as a fan-like concept, then inevitably, if you believe that you have found the right path, all the other paths are wrong, and your task is to force everyone onto that narrow path. Surely it would be so much better if we had this concept of the truth being, as it were, at the center of a circle. We are somewhere on that circumference, and there are many different paths that lead into that truth. And the thing for us to realize, I think, is that the particular path that we choose is very much a personal thing, and it depends on many different factors. It probably depends on the person that we have met that may have explained that path to us, and various experiences we've had. If only we realize, all right, this path for me is the right one at this particular time, but that does not invalidate the other paths.
But are you saying, therefore, that there's only one truth, that we only have one truth that we can actually listen to and experience?
There can only be one truth with a capital T, one reality. And I think the point is that all the great religions have been trying inadequately in their own way to point man towards that truth. But for heaven's sake, don't let's, you know, have this idea that there is only this one wretched, narrow path and that all the others are wrong.
All right, can I move the discussion on and say that we've dealt to some extent with revelation, but other people who are believers, and Hugh Montefiore has, if you like, supporters who don't only argue from design, would say that it's much more about experience and not about either design or revelation at all.
I hope he wouldn't.
And the experience, not Hugh Montefiore, other people would. And the experience is God showing himself to us or us feeling him. And Eric Dell, you're an evangelist in the Church of England. Would you argue with that?
I think I would a bit, yes,
Yes.
because I do believe that you cannot prove God scientifically. Science can only deal with the material of this current universe. God is necessarily not of this universe. He's superior and outside of it. So consequently, you can't prove him scientifically or disprove him. But of course you want to go much further than that. If there's a God who made me, I want to know who he is. I want to know what he's like. And of course we Christians believe that he's actually done that, said it for us in the person of Christ. And we also believe that he's alive today and we can know him. So that's what we're here to say, and that anybody can actually say, go beyond just the evidence, whether it's for or against, and say, God, if you're really there, I want to know you, because I'm prepared to know the truth, whatever it costs me.
Right, Hugh Montefiore.
I do actually think that religious experience is a very important pointer, and in my book I say it's the convergence of, as I see it, science showing us we're not just random products, probably not just random products, and conscience, and experience. I mean, why is it that between 30 and 60% of people, even in this secular country, lay claim to some form of religious experience?
Pretty out.
And one point I'm continually making is that the postulation of God explains nothing whatsoever, because it is consistent with anything that happens. And of course it's consistent with people having religious experience, I mean, or not having it, or it's consistent with people who say consciousness is implanted. I mean, equally well you can say that sadism is implanted. I mean, whatever is, but you've got to explain in some way that it would have been otherwise if there had not been a creator. And this is what is totally missing, any kind of rational argument.
Right.
I actually wanted to bring up just something of the evidence that is within human experience of just the sheer business of significance. When I say to my wife, I love you, I mean something. I do not mean I, an accidental conglomeration of molecules from some antediluvian swamp, happen to feel a totally accidental attraction towards you, another totally accidental conglomeration, etc. I mean I love you. And if you say to me, but you're just an accident happening to another accident, something inside me says that's not right. Now, that's not good scientific evidence, but it's human evidence. And I don't honestly think you can ignore it. It's part of humanity. And in the end, what it means is, I mean something because there is a meaning, and there's a meaner.
I must protest against the previous speaker's grotesque misuse of the word accident. I have a wife too, and I love her very much. When I say that I love her, I don't accident. I don't believe that she came into the world uncaused any more than that I did, or my love doesn't have a cause, psychological cause. This levity in using these words shocks me.
But Freddie, you do think that both you and your wife are the product of an ultimately meaningless process, don't you?
If you mean that I don't think that our existence was planned by some supernatural being, yes.
No, but meaningless.
I do not accept the word meaningless. I do not think that my love for her is meaningless. I think my love for her has a very great deal of meaning. It's very intense.
Has meaning for you,
and
but
for
no
her,
ultimate meaning.
I don't know what ultimate meaning means here.
I'm going to move on because, in fact, we've gone slightly off part of our subject and we haven't looked at other ways of experiencing God. Many people say that there is a different way, a much quieter way of experiencing God. Can we ask Sister Martina Hayden?
I mean, I've listened with great interest to the arguments, and I couldn't help looking back over my own life. I mean, I found myself a Catholic, born in Catholic Ireland. I thought there was nothing else in the world. And my journey has been about finding out all the different aspects of the truth. And I went through all the phases of trying to prove the existence of God, from arguments and learning about the first cause, uncaused, and it left me as cold as ice. It just didn't do anything for me as a person. And I think in these last years it has been much more about looking for God within the design of my life, actually seeing design in my life, how somehow I am being led. I mean, even the fact that I join an order which is dedicated to searching for truth is not, to me, an accident. And I hear all the different truths, and I'm really excited about what's happening in science, because I can see that that really is, there's a convergence of truth, and there's so much more humility. I'm not saying I'm humble, as they say, if you say you are, you aren't. But I'm saying that scientists, theologians, people in general are much more humble than they were, say, 20 years ago. I mean, I was locked in combat with Freddie Eyre 20 years ago or so about conscience. I wouldn't argue that way now. I don't want to. Well, I can't match his mind, and I don't think the mind can actually say it all. I find myself going to my heart about religion, and I just discover more evil in myself and more good as I go along. And the revelation of Christ in Christianity helps me there immensely, because I find that Christ didn't talk theological argument or logical argument. He didn't use any of those. He talked about the lilies of the field. He said the kingdom of heaven is like, that's a simile. So for me, God is revealing himself in me, in everybody. You know, I felt really close to the Buddhist gentleman who was speaking over there. I really felt I can relate to that too. I can look into the heart of a rose and it speaks to me. I can also look into the Bible and it speaks to me.
Professor Eyre, are you going to say that that's not a valid experience and that that's not a valid argument?
I think it's not an argument at all. It is a very moving and personal position, which I think is the last to want to criticize.
Right. Well, this debate hasn't included one essential element, and that's looking at the alternative choice that belief in God is totally man-made. Hans Isaac, how do you view that?
Well, as an atheist, of course, I can't believe that God created man. I think my
Well,
parents
you
had
not?
something to do with it. I have a distinct feeling that we're taking too provincial a view of the terms God and religion. We think of it in terms of dear old Pink Church of England. But of course that is only one very small aspect of religion. Both Torquemada and St. Francis of Assisi were religious and had an image of God, but they were very different images of God, one from the other. The Ayatollah Khomeini and Bishop Montefiore, I'm sure, have quite different gods in mind when they think about religion. Even the Jehovah of the Old Testament is very different to the kind of God that the bishop is talking about. So I think it's very important to realize that if man creates God in his image, as I'm sure he does, he has many different needs and consequently creates many different types of God.
Can you define that a bit more closely? What are you actually saying? I mean, I can see Hugh Montefiore blenching, but can you actually simplify that a little for our audience?
Well, if your personality is warlike, wants to proselytize, is aggressive and so on, then you go for the kind of God that the Quran portrays, which wants to proselytize the world and is warlike and so on. If you are peace-loving, you want to have an assurance of a future life and so on, and happiness, then perhaps you adopt the kind of God portrayed by the
Ahmed
Church of
Deedat,
England.
would you agree with that?
I don't, ma'am. You see, I don't think that our brother has read the Quran. You see, there are 99 attributes of God, and out of that, this one that you are talking about is non-existent in this book.
Can I ask you a question? Are you saying then that the Muslim God is actually a peace-loving God who wants peace in the world?
Yes, yes. And he tells us that if somebody wars against you, you have a right to fight back, unlike turning the other cheek.
What about the concept of the holy war, the jihad?
Yes, that is a struggle for righteousness. For example, Britain, when she was under attack by Hitler, what you did was jihad. And we take our hat to you, to Winston Churchill, for, putting the spirit into your people. Now that is what is a defensive war. And you had to retaliate. Because if you didn't, if you just sat back, keeping Hitler at bay, it wouldn't have served the purpose. You have to attack. And in the state of nature, everyone has a right to do that. So Islam allows us to defend ourselves and to extend our hostilities to a reasonable amount of satisfaction and retaliation.
All right, can I come back to Hans Eysenck, and perhaps you'd like to develop it a little further, because we've actually heard an exchange between the two of you, but would you like to come out on a little bit further about perhaps other religions and not only about Islam?
Well, it's not so much a particular religion, because within each religion you have all sorts of different gods. As I was trying to say, that of Torquemada and that of Francis of Assisi are all Christian gods. They're entirely different. So man creates God in his own image, even within a given religion, and certainly between different religions. The God he needs will be a different God according to his own personal requirements and to the kind of society in which he lives. Our society is different to that of the time of the Crusades, and consequently we need a different kind of God.
Can I ask you then about the role of conscience, and where does conscience come from?
Well, psychological experiments on conscience have shown pretty conclusively that you can manipulate it and create it through a process of social learning, Pavlovian conditioning, and so on. It is something that is acquired through social influences, although there is also a strong genetic factor in it. In other words, altruism, the tendency to do good to others, is certainly, to some extent at least, genetically controlled, in the sense that if you look at identical and fraternal twins, there's a much higher correlation within the identical than within the fraternal groups. And the same is true of religion. I think that's a very important point,
Professor
that religious beliefs are in fact genetically controlled.
Professor Eyre, where do you think conscience comes from?
I entirely agree with the last speaker.
I have no quarrel with that at all. Anybody in the general audience? Yes, in the front row.
I'd like to throw out a definition that might be helpful to some people of the difference between religion and Christianity, because there's a distinct difference. Religion is largely man, by his own efforts, some of which have been demonstrated tonight, in terms of mental gymnastics, trying to get to God and looking at the most powerful thing, like the sun, and bowing to that. Christianity is God coming for man. And I was interested in Herman Bondi's remark that he's an anti-revelationist. If there's a God at all, there's no way we can know anything about him by guessing.